The first round of this season within the World Endurance Championship is officially over, and we now know everything that happened. From new cars to a dominant performance from a manufacturer, this race was really intense. We even saw the golden number 1 rule being broken by a certain team, and this had dramatic consequences. So this is a race recap of what happened during the 2025 edition of the Qatar 1812 kilometer. This race at the Lusail International Circuit saw 36 cars participate, and the attention was specifically on 4 cars, which were making their debuts in the WEC. This included the 2 Valkyrie AMR LMH cars from Aston Martin and the Heart of Racing team. And then there were those 2 Mercedes AMG GT3s from the Iron Lynx. Both kinds of cars struggled throughout the event, and were at the end of the grid order in their respective classes, although we knew that this would likely happen heading into this event, as these cars were brand new to the championship. The overall pole position for Qatar in the hypercar class would be claimed by Ferrari AF Corsa and Antonio Giovinazzi, as he put the number 51 Ferrari 499P on pole position, with a 1 minute 38.359, and to be honest, this was an indication of what was to come for Ferrari in the race, as I'll explain later on. Over an LMGT3, it was a McLaren 1-2 lockout, as new driver for United Autosports Jean Galal put the number 95 McLaren on pole position in class. At the start of this race, James Calado would lead the field to green in the number 51 Ferrari, and across the first lap, there were no incidents whatsoever. The beginning of this race was headlined by the formally 3rd place number 50 Ferrari, as driver Nicholas Nielsen passed the number 15 BMW, which started 2nd, and made it a 1-2 for Ferrari in Qatar. Meanwhile, in LMGT3, McLaren continued to hold 1st and 2nd at the start, but as we would see later on, they would have major competition for the winner's trophy, especially from manufacturers Lexus and Chevrolet. By the way, keep a close eye on when I talk about those RCF GT3s across this video, as honestly, they were the surprise of the event, as this was clearly turning out to be the best venue for Lexus thus far in the World Endurance Championship. Up at the front, Ferrari AF Corsa built a healthy gap to the rest of the field. Throughout the race, Ferrari arguably had the fastest car, and it was showing by their performance with these 3 AF Corsa entered 499Ps. Now, I want to give a shout out to the Alpine Endurance team, as the number 35 car made up the most positions in the first few laps of all the hypercar entries. Alpine's racer Ferdinand Habsburg was absolutely flying during his first stint in the A424, as within the first few corners, he moved up from 9th to 4th on the grid. So definitely an impressive showing from the Austrian racer and the Alpine squad. As the race progressed, Arnaud Rabat got the number 78 Lexus up into 2nd in LMGT3, with a great move on the 59 McLaren, and soon after, the French driver got the Lexus ahead of the 2nd McLaren and into the lead of this class, which highlighted the pace of the Akotis ASP run entry. However, while one Lexus was doing well in the race, the other had a significantly different time out on track. Unfortunately, the number 87 Lexus, with Petru Umberesco behind the wheel at the time, made contact with the number 21 Ferrari 296 from Vista AF Corsa, and the car had to go into the pits for major repairs, which eliminated it from contention of the LMGT3 win, which was a shame because, as I mentioned, Lexus had a strong car here in Qatar. In hypercar, Earl Bamber in the number 38 Cadillac was on a charge to bring Hertz Team Jota and the American brand back to the top step of the podium. But unexpectedly, drama would strike, because while in a battle for 3rd with Kevin Magnussen's number 15 BMW, the Cadillac went for a spin at turn 1 after contact with a GT McLaren car, which ultimately sent the V Series R to the back of the grid in hypercar, and the entry would now play the recovery game. Although the 38 V Series R was not the only entry in the hypercar class that had issues, as later on the car involved in the battle for 3rd with the Cadillac the number 15 BMW would have an electrical issue, with Kevin Magnussen having the car still not off the limiter. With Magnussen's BMW falling further behind in the order, this therefore temporarily promoted the number 35 Alpine into third, with the two factory Ferraris still out in front in this race. Now, I quickly want to mention that the two manufacturers that finished first and second in the championship last year were basically out of contention for the win during this entire race. Toyota and Porsche were both negatively affected by the balance of performance, and the car brand's entries really struggled during this event. Back to those Aston Martin Valkyries, which at this point were still running, but like most new cars, they were having some issues. One of the problems though was quite surprising, as the 009 Aston Martin had its door come loose and eventually fly off. This was very reminiscent to when Neil Johnny had the door loose on the number 99 Proton competition Porsche at Spa last year, and while Gianni was able to get the door closed, this time the Aston Martin's entire door came off. Obviously, driver Marco Sorensen had to bring the car back into the pits for repairs, and eventually it did return to the track. But this was still a very interesting circumstance during the race that I wanted to point out. With around 60 laps to go into this event in Qatar, a not so common incident happened for a Toyota entry, as Mike Conway just ran a little too wide at the exit of the turn, which sent his number 7 car into the gravel. Thankfully, the car wasn't out of the race and didn't sustain any major damage, and was able to return to the track quite quickly. But as I mentioned earlier, this was an uncommon incident for the Toyota Gazoo Racing Squad, as in fact, they don't have many of them if I'm being honest. Now, at this point in the race, this is where things got really interesting. Drama would soon unfold, and it started out when the safety car was released out on track due to a spin for Christian Reed in the number 61 Mercedes GT3 from the Iron Lynx, and this resulted in a mix in strategies, which shuffled the grid around a little. The pit stop sequences for Ferrari and Cadillac moved the two Hertz Team Jota entries into the lead of this race under safety car conditions, with the Ferraris pushed back to 3rd, 4th, and 5th. This ultimately threatened Ferrari's chances at taking overall victory, because we knew for a fact that Cadillac Hertz Team Jota had some very strong cars here in Qatar. But as we know now, this is of course not where those two V-Series R entries would finish in the race, as they crashed into each other under the safety car conditions, which eventually tumbled the entries down the order, with repairs needing to take place for both the Cadillacs. This was definitely the most dramatic moment of the event, and ultimately the repairs taken by the Cadillacs forced them to the back of the grid, and they were no longer in the fight for the podium. This was a nightmare scenario, as drivers Alex Lynn and Jenson Button broke the #1 golden rule of motorsport: don't hit your teammate, and ultimately the consequences were irreversibly devastating. When the safety car eventually ended, Ferrari found themselves in a familiar position, leading the race. But not just that, because they led 1, 2, 3. And at the time, they were followed by the number 20 BMW and the number 35 Alpine. Over in LMGT3, the top 5 at the time was the number 78 Lexus from Akotis ASP, the number 31 Team WRT BMW, which had Ahmed Al-Harti chasing down that Lexus, and then came the two United Autosports McLarens, with the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin rounding off the top 5. During the nighttime hours of the Qatar 1812 kilometer, the number 35 Alpine in the hypercar class had a very scary incident, with Charles Malesi on board. It really was a narrow escape for all entries involved, and it could have been a lot worse, maybe even like that number 2 Cadillac's incident at Spa where the car went airborne. Thankfully, the Alpine and the GT cars involved were able to continue on into the rest of the race. However, it was an impactful incident for the number 35 car. Back up at the front, the two factory Ferraris had a bit of drama, with the 51 car serving 2 drive-through penalties, and the number 50 car having an incident with Dries Vanthoor in the BMW. This therefore allowed the yellow number 83 Privateer AF Corsa Ferrari into the lead of this race in Qatar, but the entry wouldn't stay in the lead for long, as we would soon find out later on in the event. Elsewhere though, there was drama for an LMGT3 entry, as for the second time this year in Losail, the number 77 Proton competition Ford Mustang would catch on fire. Of course, during the prologue, this car also had a similar moment in the first session, and the team had to effectively rebuild the entire front of the car, and unfortunately, they would have more work to do after this second time of the car catching fire. Thankfully, Portuguese driver Bernardo Sousa was able to get out of the car unhurt, but after 148 laps of racing, it was a shame not to see this Ford finish the race here in Qatar. Back up in Hypercar, I mentioned that the 83 Ferrari wouldn't stay in first for long, and this is what I meant by that, as Miguel Molina in the recovering number 50 Ferrari would pass Phil Hansen in the 83 car on track, and move ahead at turn 1 into the overall lead of this race. As the race progressed, unfortunately we would get our first and only retirement in the Hypercar class, as the brand new 007 Aston Martin Valkyrie would be forced to retire due to a transmission issue, after completing 181 laps in the event. While it was unfortunate that the car had to retire, we have to remember that this was kind of expected, considering the fact that this Aston Martin Valkyrie LMH had never raced in an endurance racing event beforehand, and Qatar was always going to be a learning event for the Heart of Racing team and the Aston Martin crew. In the closing laps of this race, in LMGT3, it became an intense fight for the win, between the number 33 Chevy Corvette and the number 59 McLaren. United Autosports driver Gregoire Saucy tried many attempts at getting past Danny Hunkadea in the 33 car, but ultimately, after a long fight for the lead, the McLaren would stay behind. As the checkered flag fell, up at the front, it would be a historic result for Ferrari in the hypercar class, as the Italian manufacturer would win in Qatar. Victory would be obtained by Antonio Foco, Miguel Molina, and Nicholas Nielsen in the number 50 Ferrari 499P. The reason why this was a historic result was because Ferrari achieved 1-2-3 in the race, and this was the very first time that the Italian brand achieved this result in sports car endurance racing since 1972. The number 83 customer Ferrari would finish in second in hypercar, while the pole-sitting number 51 car would claim the final podium spot in third. Concluding the top 5 in hypercar would be the number 15 BMW and the number 8 Toyota. The second GR010 would finish just behind in 6th, followed by the number 20 BMW, the number 12 Cadillac from Hertz Team Jota, the number 93 Peugeot, and finally the first of the factory Porsches, the number 5 car, which would round off the top 10. One quick note on the hypercar results, as even though the 007 Aston Martin didn't finish the event, the brand new 009 Valkyrie was able to finish this race, which was a monumental achievement for Aston Martin and the team. In LMGT3, Corvette Racing and TF Sport would secure their first win together in this era, and continue a fantastic start to the year for Chevrolet as a brand in motorsports, as they won the Rolex 24 Daytona in GTD with AWA at the start of this year, and they also won the Daytona 500 this year in the NASCAR Cup Series. Specifically, the car that took victory was the number 33 Corvette Z06 GT3R, and the drivers that took the win were Ben Keating, Daniel Hunkadea, and ELMS champion Johnny Edgar. After just barely missing the win, coming in second in LMGT3 was the number 59 McLaren, and rounding off the top 3 was the Benz-sponsored Team WRT number 31 BMW. The top 3 entries were then followed by the number 78 Akotis ASP Lexus, with the first of the Vista AF Corsa Ferraris completing the top 5. In 6th was the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin, followed by the number 95 McLaren from United Autosports, the 54 Ferrari AF Corsa entry, the number 10 Racing Spirit of Lehman Aston Martin, and finally concluding the top 10 was the number 88 Proton Competition Ford Mustang. When it comes to the championship standings following round 1, the leaderboard currently looks exactly like the results of Qatar, so I won't list the championship standings right now, But for now, the leaders in the categories are the number 50 Ferrari AF Corsa entry at the top in Hypercar, and the number 33 TF Sport Corvette in LMGT3. So that concludes this race recap of the first round of the WEC in 2025, the Qatar 1812 kilometer. The next race will be taking place in April, and that will be the 6 Hours of Imola in Italy. So what did you think about the first race of the season here in Qatar? Well, I'd be interested to know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like endurance racing, definitely subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I'm releasing videos on a weekly basis regarding the WEC, IMSA, Intercontinental GT, and much more. To watch more content now, check out these suggested videos I've put on screen. For now though, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.